In the glittering, treacherous ballrooms of Regency London, a single misstep can mean social ruin. For a young woman on the marriage market, scandal is a death sentence. So when Miss Annalise Finch found herself trapped, her reputation hanging by a thread, she did the unthinkable. She reached into the shadows and seized the hand of the most formidable and reclusive man in the room, Alistair Beaumont, the Earl of Rowan-Field. It was a desperate gamble meant to last a single moment, a shield against her aggressor. But she could never have known that for the cold, calculating Earl that one moment was an eternity, and that once he had her hand in his, he had no intention of ever letting go. The ballroom at Devonshire House was a dizzying kaleidoscope of silk, sapphires, and scandal. The year was 1817, and the London season was in full suffocating bloom. For Annalise Finch, it felt less like a celebration and more like a battlefield. Her family, possessing a respectable but unremarkable fortune from trade, had managed to secure invitations, a feat her mother spoke of, with the reverence one might reserve for a divine miracle. But navigating these treacherous waters was another matter entirely. Annalise smoothed the skirts of her primrose silk gown, her gloved fingers trembling slightly. The air, thick with the scent of beeswax and hothouse flowers, was becoming difficult to breathe. The problem was not the crowd, nor the heat from the 1,000 candles flickering in the chandeliers above. The problem was Lord Percival Finchley. He had been pursuing her with the relentless, predatory focus of a hawk since her debut. He was handsome in a way that set one's teeth on edge, all polished surfaces, and no discernible depth. His title was minor, his debts legendary, and his reputation, whispered behind fluttering fans, was appalling. And he had just cornered her in the alcove leading to the terrace. Miss Finch, he purred his breath, smelling of sweet claret. He blocked her only exit, his large frame, casting a shadow over her. Hiding from me, I find that rather wounding. Not at all, my Lord, Annalise replied, her voice cooler than she felt. I was merely seeking a moment of quiet. Quiet is for the countryside, he smirked, stepping closer. The laughter and music of the orchestra seemed a world away. A beauty like yours is meant to be admired, worshipped even. He reached out to touch a curl that had escaped her coiffure. Annalise flinched back. Lord Finchley, you are too forward. Panic began to constrict her chest. She could feel the eyes of the ton upon them. A lady didn't make a scene. A lady didn't rebuke a lord so publicly. But to allow him to continue was to invite ruinous speculation. Her mind raced, searching for an escape, an excuse, a savior. Her desperate gaze scanned the periphery of the room, past the dancing couples and the gossiping matrons. It landed on a figure standing half hidden by a marble column near the far end of the room. He was tall, dressed in immaculate, severe black, a stark contrast to the colourful peacocks of the ballroom. He stood perfectly still, a glass of brandy held loosely in one hand, his attention seemingly fixed on nothing. She recognized him instantly. Everyone did. Alistair Beaumont, the Earl of Rowan-Field, the Shadow Earl, a hero of Waterloo, they said, who had returned from the war a changed man. He was impossibly wealthy and held one of the oldest titles in England, yet he shunned society. He was famously cold-cutting and utterly unapproachable. To see him at such a gathering was a rarity, an event that had already set the Dowager Marchioness of Abernathy's tongue wagging for a full 10 minutes. Finchley's hand was now on her arm, his grip unpleasantly tight. Come now, Annalise. A little stroll on the terrace. No one will notice. It was a lie. Everyone would notice, and they would all assume the worst. Ruin. The word echoed in her mind. Her family's ambitions, her younger sister Clara's future, all of it, would turn to ash. In that moment, a spark of pure, unadulterated desperation ignited within her. An idea so audacious, so suicidal, that it could only have been born of sheer terror. "Forgive me, my Lord Annalise," said her voice, shaking but clear. "I believe my fiancé is waiting for me." Finchley froze, his smug expression faltering. "Your fiancé? You are not engaged." "Oh, but I am," she insisted, her heart hammering against her ribs. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she wrenched her arm free. She didn't run. She walked with as much dignity as she could muster directly towards the shadows, directly towards the Earl of Rowanfield. He watched her approach, his grey eyes, startlingly light in his stern, handsome face, missing nothing. There was no flicker of surprise, no curiosity, just a calm, unnerving assessment. He looked like a marble statue, beautiful and entirely lifeless. She reached him, her breath catching in her throat. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath, the music a distant hum. Lord Finchley stood frozen in the alcove, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Annalise stopped directly in front of the Earl. She didn't have a plan beyond this single mad act. Looking up into his impassive face, she curtsied slightly and spoke, her voice a whisper meant only for him. "My lord, forgive this unforgivable imposition. I am in desperate need of assistance." A moment is all I ask. And then she did it. Before he could respond, before he could refuse, and leave her to be devoured by the wolves, she reached out and took his hand. His skin was cool, his fingers long and strong. It was a shocking, intimate gesture. A woman did not simply take an earl's hand. A gasp rippled through the nearby guests. Annalise expected him to pull away, to fix her with a look of withering disdain that would send her fleeing in shame. She expected her world to end right there. Instead, the impossible happened. His fingers closed around hers. His grip was not punishing, but it was absolute. Firm. Inescapable. He turned his cool grey eyes from her to the fuming Lord Finchley across the room. A slight, almost imperceptible arching of his brow was his only reaction. Then he looked back down at her. For the first time, a flicker of something amusement-intrigue danced in the depths of his eyes. A low, quiet voice, smooth as aged whiskey, met her ears. "It seems Miss Finch, the Earl of Rowanfield," said his thumb, brushing slowly over her glove, "that you have kept me waiting." The ballroom had erupted in a maelstrom of whispers. The sight of the reclusive Earl of Rowanfield, not only tolerating the touch of an unknown miss, but holding her hand as if it were his right, was more riveting than any royal announcement. Annalise Finch, who an hour ago had been just another face in the crowd, was now the absolute centre of the Tons universe. Alistair Beaumont did not release her hand. Instead, he tucked it securely into the crook of his arm. "I believe the air in here has become rather stale," he stated, his voice carrying just enough to be overheard by those nearest. "Allow me to see you home, Miss Finch." It was not a request. It was a command, wrapped in the thinnest veneer of courtesy. Dazed Annalise could only nod. He led her through the throng of onlookers, the crowd parting before them like the Red Sea. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her back. She caught a glimpse of Lord Finchley, his face pale with rage and humiliation, before she was swept out into the cool night air. The silence in the Earl's carriage was heavier than any conversation. The vehicle itself was a testament to his status: dark, lacquered wood, supple leather seats, and the Rowanfield crest discreetly embossed on the door. It moved with a silent, well-sprung grace that spoke of immense wealth. Annalise sat opposite him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her borrowed courage having evaporated completely, leaving only a cold dread. She had survived the fire only to find herself in the lion's den. The Earl watched her from the shadows of his corner. The passing street lamps cast fleeting light across his face, illuminating a strong jaw, a straight nose, and a mouth that looked as if it had forgotten how to smile. A thin scar, barely visible, traced a line from his left temple into his hairline, a souvenir from the war, she presumed. "You have Miss Finch," he began, his voice calm, and even placed us both in a rather interesting position. "My lord, I can only offer my most profound and sincere apologies," Annalise stammered, her gaze fixed on her own lap. "My actions were born of desperation. Lord Finchley was insistent. I never intended to involve you or to imply, that is to say, that I am your fiancé," he finished for her. He didn't sound angry. He sounded analytical, an effective if dramatic solution to your immediate problem. However, it has created a new one. By dawn, every gossip columnist from the Morning Post to the cheapest scandal sheet will have our names linked. Your reputation, which you were so keen to protect, is now more precarious than ever. It hangs entirely on my next move." The cold truth of his words settled over her. He could deny everything. He could claim she was a hysterical, ambitious woman who had thrown herself at him. He would be believed. He was the Earl of Rowanfield. She was a nobody. What will you do?" she whispered. He leaned forward slightly, the faint light catching the silver in his grey eyes. "That depends on you. You used me as a shield. I am now offering to make that shield permanent, for a price." Annalise's head snapped up. "A price I find society tiresome," he stated bluntly. "Specifically the matchmaking mummers and their simpering daughters. They see my title and my fortune, and they hunt me as if I were a prize stag. It is exhausting. Your little drama tonight has given me an idea." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the carriage. "We will continue the charade," he said. "You and I will be officially engaged. You will play the part of my adoring fiancé. In return, you will have my name, my protection. Lord Finchley and his kind will not dare to approach you. Your family's social standing will be secured beyond their wildest dreams. You will be the future Countess of Rowanfield." Annalise stared at him, speechless. It was an insane proposal, a business transaction masquerading as a love match. "And what do you gain?" she finally managed to ask. "Beyond freedom from ambitious mother's peace," he said simply. "With you on my arm, the hunt will be over. They will move on to other prey. I require a fiancé who is intelligent enough to understand the rules of this arrangement and convincing enough to play the part. Your performance tonight suggests you are more than qualified. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement, Miss Finch, a contract." And when this contract is over, she pressed a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. "When you tire of the game, we will stage a discreet, amicable parting of ways after the season. A simple incompatibility of temperament. By then your family will be established, and you will have no shortage of suitable offers. You will be free, and I will have had my summer of peace." It was a cold, calculated proposal, devoid of any emotion. Yet it was also a lifeline. He was offering her everything she and her family could ever want: security, status, and protection. The alternative was to be cast back into the sea, where sharks like Finchley were circling her reputation, now tainted by the very scandal she had tried to avoid. "Why me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "You could have any woman in London. Why agree to the mad fantasy of a stranger?" He settled back into the shadows, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he was silent. Perhaps he said, his voice a low murmur, "I was bored. And you, Miss Finch, are the least boring thing to have happened to me since I returned from France." He paused. "Do we have an agreement?" The carriage slowed as it approached her family's modest but respectable home in Bloomsbury. Her future, in all its terrifying, brilliant uncertainty, was waiting on her answer. She thought of her gentle sister Clara and her parents' anxious faces. She thought of Lord Finchley's sneer. Then she looked at the Earl, at the unyielding strength in his posture, the sharp intelligence in his eyes. He was a danger, but he was a different kind of danger. He was a fortress. Yes, my Lord, Annalise heard herself say the words, feeling foreign on her tongue. We have an agreement. A small, humorless smile touched the Earl's lips. Excellent. I will call on your father tomorrow at noon to make it official. Be ready to be convincing, Miss Finch. The performance begins at dawn. The news of the engagement between the Shadow Earl and the unassuming Miss Finch exploded like a cannonball in the placid waters of the London Tun. Annalise's father, a sensible merchant who nearly fainted when the Earl of Rowanfield's carriage appeared outside his door, could only stammer his assent. Her mother wept with joy, already planning a guest list for a wedding that would eclipse a royal coronation. Her sister Clara was giddy with the romance of it all, seeing only a fairy tale, where Annalise saw the cold, hard lines of a contract. Life as the Earl's fiancée was a dizzying whirlwind. A river of packages began arriving at the Finch residence gowns from the finest modistas in London, jewels from Rundle Bridge that made her mother gasp invitations to every event of consequence. Alistair, now a constant and unnervingly composed presence in her life, orchestrated it all with quiet, ruthless efficiency. Their public courtship was a masterpiece of theatre. They rode in Hyde Park during the fashionable hour, Alistair on his magnificent black stallion Annalise, on a gentle grey mare he had procured for her. He was an impeccable escort, his hand always ready to assist her. His expression, a carefully constructed mask of attentiveness. They attended the opera, sitting in his family's prominent box, the focus of 1,000 inquisitive opera glasses. To the world they were the season's most unlikely and therefore most fascinating couple. Behind the curtain, their interactions were stilted and formal. He was her tutor in the art of being a future countess. When the Dowager Marchioness of Abernathy asks about our first meeting, you will say, "It was at a private musical a month ago," he instructed during one tense lesson in his vast, silent library on Grosvenor Square. You will describe my rendition of a Schubert piece as moving. It is a plausible fiction. And do you play Schubert? My Lord Annalise asked, a touch of defiance in her voice. No, he replied without looking up from his papers. But neither she nor you will ever ask me to prove it. The Tun prefers a romantic lie to a dull truth. He taught her about his family history, the names and faces of relatives on the cold, painted canvases that lined his halls. He informed her of the political leanings she was now expected to adopt, staunchly Tory, and the charities she would be expected to patronize. It felt less like a courtship and more like an induction into a very exclusive, very lonely club. Annalise played her part to perfection. She smiled demurely, tilted her head at the correct angle, and recited the lines he had fed her. She was a quick study, and her natural intelligence, long hidden behind a veneer of propriety, allowed her to navigate the shark-infested waters with surprising skill. She even managed to parry the barbed questions of the Dowager Marchioness, who watched their every move with the gimlet eye of a hanging judge. Yet glimpses of the man behind the mask occasionally broke through. One afternoon, while walking through a curated Mayfair gallery, they passed a painting of a stormy seascape. "It's beautiful," Annalise murmured, genuinely captivated by the raw power of the waves. "It's chaos," Alistair said, his voice unusually tight. "An artist's attempt to find beauty in destruction. A fool's errand. The bitterness in his tone was so raw, so profound, that Annalise turned to look at him. For a fleeting second the mask was gone. In his eyes she saw not the cold Earl, but a man haunted by a storm far greater than any on canvas. He saw her looking, and the shutters immediately came down. The artist is a protégé of the Prince Regent, he said, his voice, once again, flat and informative. It is fashionable to admire his work. Meanwhile, the spectre of Lord Finchley had not entirely vanished. He watched them from across ballrooms, his eyes filled with a venomous resentment. Protected by Alistair's formidable presence, Annalise was now untouchable, but the hatred radiating from Finchley was a constant, unsettling reminder of the debt she owed the Earl. One evening, as they were leaving a particularly tedious soiree at Lady Jersey's, Annalise felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The constant performance, the weight of the lies, was taking its toll. "You look pale," Miss Finch Alistair observed, as he handed her into the carriage. "Is the charade becoming too much for you?" "It is simply tiring, my lord," she admitted, leaning her head back against the leather. "Pretending to be someone I am not." "A useful skill to acquire," he remarked, his voice devoid of sympathy. Annalise's patience, worn thin by weeks of his detached commands, finally snapped. "Is that all life is to you? A series of useful skills and strategic maneuvers? Is there no room for genuine feeling, for joy, for anything other than this cold, controlled existence?" The outburst hung in the air between them. She expected a sharp rebuke, a reminder of her place in their arrangement. Instead, he was silent for a long time, the rhythm of the horse's hooves on the cobblestones the only sound. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reflective. "Genuine feeling. Miss Finch is a liability. It can be used against you. It is a weapon that others will turn upon you without a moment's hesitation. Control is not an existence. It is a defense. It is survival." He said nothing more for the rest of the journey, but his words lingered long after he had deposited her at her door. For the first time, Annalise began to wonder what wounds the Earl of Rowanfield was so desperately trying to defend. The gilded cage she found herself in was his creation, but she was starting to realize he was a prisoner in it too. Alistair announced they were to spend a week at his country estate Rowanfield Park in Berkshire. The official reason given to the ton was to allow Annalise to become acquainted with her future home. The true reason, he told her in his usual clipped manner, was to escape the incessant scrutiny of London and to present a united front to his household staff. The journey from the city was made in his luxurious travelling coach. As the grimy, crowded streets of London gave way to rolling green hills and tidy villages, Annalise felt a sense of relief. The air itself seemed cleaner, lighter. Alistair, for his part, remained silent, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape, his thoughts a closed book. Rowanfield Park was not just a house, it was a kingdom, a sprawling Elizabethan manor of warm, honey-coloured stone. It stood amidst acres of ancient woodland and manicured gardens. It was beautiful, majestic, and like its owner, overwhelmingly intimidating. The staff, led by a stern but impeccably correct butler named Jennings, lined up to greet their future mistress. Annalise, clad in a simple but elegant travelling dress Alistair's modiste had insisted upon, managed a gracious smile, her heart pounding with the weight of her deception. The first few days passed in a blur of formal introductions and tours. She was shown the portrait gallery, the grand ballroom, that hadn't been used in years, the endless succession of staterooms. It all felt like a museum, cold, beautiful, and untouched by life. The change came on the third afternoon. Annalise, seeking a reprieve from the oppressive grandeur, had wandered into the West Wing, a section of the house she had been told was not in use. She found a door slightly ajar, and curiosity getting the better of her pushed it open. It was a study, but smaller and more personal than the grand library downstairs. Dust motes danced in the single beam of sunlight, slanting through a grimy window. Books were piled on every surface, maps were tacked to the walls, and a half-finished game of chess sat on a small table. It felt lived in, loved in a way the rest of the house did not. That was my brother's room. Annalise whirled around. Alistair stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry, as she'd expected, but a profound sadness seemed to cling to him like a shroud. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude." He walked past her into the room, his slight limp more pronounced on the uneven floorboards. He ran a hand over the back of a worn leather chair. His name was Thomas. He was a captain. Younger than me by 2 years. He spoke of him in the past tense. Annalise's heart ached. Was he at Waterloo? Yes, Alistair said, his back still to her. He died at Hougoumont. He was the heart of this house, the heart of our family. He turned then, and the look in his eyes made Annalise forget their bargain, their lies, everything. It was a look of such raw, unguarded grief that it stole her breath. He was the one who was meant to be the Earl. Alistair continued his voice, low and rough with emotion. He loved this place, the land, the people. He knew every tenant by name. I was the second son, the spare. I was meant for the army, for fighting and dying in some foreign field. It seems fate enjoys its little ironies. He walked over to the chessboard and picked up a white knight. We were playing a game by post while I was in command. This was his last move sent the week before the battle. I never had the chance to send my reply. Annalise felt tears prick her eyes. In this dusty, forgotten room, she was finally seeing the real Alistair Beaumont. Not the cold, calculating Earl, but a man shattered by loss, thrust into a role he never wanted, haunted by the ghost of the brother he loved. "My lord, Alistair," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. "I am so very sorry." He looked at her, his composure cracking. "He would have liked you," he said, the admission sounding as if it were torn from him. "You're clever. You don't simper." You would have run circles around him in an argument, and he would have adored it. A fragile, unscripted silence settled between them. Annalise felt an overwhelming urge to reach out to offer some small comfort, but she didn't dare. The distance between them had been a core tenet of their agreement. To her astonishment, he closed the gap. He took a step towards her, his gaze searching her face. "Why did you do it, Annalise?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "At the ball. Why did you choose me? Of all the men in that room, why the one most certain to refuse you, because you were honest?" She confessed her own voice, trembling. Everyone else in that room wears a mask of charm and friendliness. You. Your mask is one of indifference. It seemed safer. It seemed real. His eyes held hers, and for a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might lean in, that the charade might crumble into a truth neither of them was prepared for. The air crackled with unspoken words, with years of his grief and weeks of her pretense. Then, as if a bell had chimed, the moment was broken. He blinked, and the Earl of Rowanfield was back. He carefully placed the chess piece back on the board and straightened up. The room should be cleaned, he said, his tone, once again, clipped and distant. It is not fitting for it to remain this way. He turned and left without another word, leaving Annalise alone with the ghost of Thomas Beaumont and the startling, terrifying realization that the cold, calculated bargain she had made was becoming dangerously compromised. She had seen the Earl's heart, and she feared she was beginning to lose her own. Their return to London marked a subtle shift in their dynamic. The stilted formality remained in public, but in their private moments, the memory of Thomas's study lay between them, a shared, unspoken vulnerability. Alistair was no longer just her shield. He was a man she was beginning to understand, and more frighteningly, a man she was beginning to care for. Annalise found herself watching him, noticing the small things, the way his hands, though graceful, were calloused from holding reins and a sword. The way his eyes would soften when he saw a child playing in the park. The deep, rumbling sound of his rare, genuine laugh, which she heard for the first time when her sister Clara recounted a particularly absurd piece of gossip. The performance was becoming less of an act and more of a painful reminder of what could never be. But as their false intimacy grew, the threat they had thought contained began to stir. Lord Percival Finchley had not been idle. Humiliated and enraged by their engagement, he had been digging, searching for any weakness, any crack in the perfect facade of the future Countess of Rowanfield. And he found one. The summons came in the form of a discreetly delivered note. It requested Annalise's presence at a small private rendezvous, claiming to contain information vital to her family's welfare. The seal was unfamiliar, but a cold dread told her exactly who it was from. Against her better judgment, and terrified of involving Alistair, she went. She met Finchley in the secluded gardens of a quiet London square. He looked triumphant, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Miss Finch, or should I say the future Lady Rowanfield, he began, his tone dripping with sarcasm. A remarkable assent. Truly, one might almost call it unbelievable. "What do you want?" Lord Finchley Annalise asked, keeping her voice steady. "I've been doing some research into your family's finances," he said, circling her like a vulture. "Your father, Mr. Finch, is a respectable man, but it seems his investments in the East India Company have soured rather dramatically of late. In fact, my sources tell me he is on the very brink of catastrophic ruin." Annalise's blood ran cold. Her father had been withdrawn and stressed for months, but she had never suspected the truth was this dire. "You're lying," she breathed. "Am I?" Finchley produced a ledger book from his coat. "This is a copy of his accounts, procured from a clerk, with loose lips and an empty purse. He is leveraged to the hilt. One more creditor calls in a loan, and he will be utterly destroyed, imprisoned for debt, your family cast into the street, the world tilted on its axis. This was the secret her father had been hiding, the reason for her mother's desperate push to see her married well. It wasn't just ambition, it was survival." "What do you want?" She repeated, her voice a hoarse whisper. "It's very simple," he purred, his eyes gleaming. "You will break your engagement to Rowanfield. You will do it publicly and humiliatingly. You will claim you cannot marry such a cold, unfeeling man. You will ruin his pride, just as you ruined mine. And if I do, you will destroy my father anyway," she shot back, her mind racing. "No," Finchley countered. "If you do as I say, I will purchase your father's debt through an intermediary. I will become his sole creditor, and give him generous terms to repay. I will save him. Your family will be secure." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You see, I still want you, Annalise. And once you are free of the Earl and indebted to me, you will be mine." The sheer villainy of his plan was breathtaking. He was offering to save her family in exchange for her life, her freedom, her very self. And if I refuse? "Then this ledger," he said, tapping it with a gloved finger, "finds its way to every bank and creditor in London by noon tomorrow, and I will have the distinct pleasure of watching as the great Earl of Rowanfield discovers his pristine fiancée is nothing more than the daughter of a bankrupt charlatan." Do you think his pride could withstand such a scandal? He will drop you faster than a hot coal, and your family will be ruined anyway. This is your only choice." Annalise felt trapped the walls of the gilded cage pressing in on her until she could barely breathe. To tell Alistair would be to admit her family's shame, to reveal the sordid truth behind their social climbing. His proposal had been a business arrangement, predicated on her being a respectable, if untitled, partner. The daughter of a debtor on the verge of prison was another matter entirely. His cold logic would dictate she was no longer a suitable asset. He would cast her aside to protect his own name. The fragile budding connection between them would be crushed under the weight of this ugly reality. But to accept Finchley's terms was unthinkable. It was a life sentence of misery and servitude to a man she despised. She looked at Finchley's smug, triumphant face and saw no way out. Her family's fate rested entirely on her. The shield Alistair had offered her had become the very thing that now put her family in the crosshairs. She had to protect them, even if it meant sacrificing herself. And more than that, she had to protect Alistair from the stain of her family's disgrace. The irony was devastating. To save the man she was starting to love, she would have to break his heart, or at least the part of it he pretended not to have. "Give me until tomorrow night," she said, her voice hollow. "The Duke of Wellington's victory ball. I will do it then." Finchley's smile was predatory. An excellent choice of venue. I do so enjoy a public spectacle. Annalise walked away each step, feeling as though she were marching towards her own execution. The bargain she had struck in desperation had led her to this. She had grabbed the Earl's hand to avoid a scandal, and now to avoid an even greater one, she would have to be the one to let go. The ballroom at Apsley House, the London home of the Duke of Wellington, was even more magnificent than Devonshire House. It was a celebration of victory filled with war heroes and the highest echelons of society. Banners from the Battle of Waterloo hung from the walls, and the Duke himself, the Iron Duke, was holding court. For Annalise, it felt like a funeral. She wore a gown of deep crimson silk, a colour Alistair had remarked suited her. The Rowanfield diamonds glittered at her throat, feeling more like a collar than an adornment. Her face, artfully powdered to hide its pallor, was a mask of serene grace. Inside, she was crumbling. Alistair was at her side, a formidable presence in his severe black evening wear. A military decoration, the Waterloo Medal was pinned to his chest, a stark reminder of the world of honour and duty. He inhabited a world she was about to betray. He had been unusually quiet all evening, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You are distant tonight, Annalise," he commented as they paused near the French windows. "Is something amiss?" "I am merely overwhelmed by the occasion, my lord." She lied, unable to meet his gaze, to be in the presence of so many great men. "They are just men," he said, his voice softer than usual, "with the same fears and follies as any other." He looked at her, and for a moment she saw the man from the study in Rowanfield Park. "Whatever is troubling you, you can tell me." His kindness was a dagger to her heart. It made what she was about to do 1,000 times harder. She had to do it now before her resolve shattered completely. She saw Lord Finchley across the room, watching them, a glass of champagne in his hand, and a look of smug anticipation on his face. It was time. Taking a deep breath, she turned to Alistair, schooling her features into a cool, remote expression she had learned from him. "My lord, there is indeed something I must say," she began, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. The Dowager Marchioness of Abernathy naturally was within earshot, her ears practically swivelling in their direction. "I find that I can no longer continue with this arrangement." Alistair's face, which had been open and concerned, shuttered completely. The Earl of Rowanfield was back in full force. "I beg your pardon. This engagement," she clarified her heart, fracturing with every word. "It was a mistake. I was flattered by your attention, of course, but I have come to realize that I cannot marry you. I cannot be shackled to a life of such cold, emotionless duty. I require warmth, passion, things you are clearly incapable of providing." A collective gasp went through their immediate audience. It was a brutal, public repudiation. She was throwing his own perceived flaws, the very essence of his public persona, back in his face. She saw a flash of genuine hurt in his eyes before they turned to chips of grey ice. It was the cruelest thing she had ever done. "I see," he said, his voice lethally soft. "You have made your feelings quite clear, Miss Finch." Finchley began to move towards them, a triumphant smirk on his face, ready to swoop in and collect his prize. But before he could reach them, another voice cut through the tense silence. "Oh, I don't think she has made them clear at all." Captain Henry Davies, Alistair's closest friend, and a fellow Waterloo veteran, stepped forward. He looked not at Annalise, but at Alistair. "Forgive me, Rowanfield, but this entire affair stinks to high heaven. I've never seen a woman more suited to you, nor you, more content. Stay out of this, Davies." Alistair bit out his pride, wounded, his anger palpable. "No, I don't think I will," Davies replied calmly, "because I spent my afternoon making inquiries after I saw our dear Lord Finchley threatening a clerk from your bank. A clerk who, it turns out, also handles the accounts of a certain Mr. Finch." Annalise's head snapped towards Davies, her eyes wide with shock. Alistair froze. The pieces began to click into place in his sharp, analytical mind. The suddenness of her reversal, her distress, the presence of Finchley. He turned his glacial gaze from Annalise to the approaching lord. Finchley, Alistair said, his voice a low growl. "What have you done?" Sensing his victory slipping away, Finchley decided to press his advantage. "She has merely come to her senses, Rowanfield. She has realized she does not wish to be married to a walking statue. She belongs with a man of spirit, a man, I might add, who has generously offered to save her family from financial ruin." It was the final confirmation. The truth was outlaid bare in the middle of the Duke of Wellington's ballroom. Annalise swayed, the shame and relief warring within her. Alistair died. But Alistair wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Finchley with an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. It was the face of a soldier on the battlefield, a commander about to give a fatal order. "You dared," he said, each word dropping like a shard of ice, "to threaten my fiancée, to use her family's distress to blackmail her. You sought to use my future wife as a pawn in your pathetic game of revenge." He took a step forward, and Finchley, for all his bluster, took an involuntary step back. The air around the Earl crackled with menace. "My lord, it is a private matter of finance." Finchley began to stammer. It ceased to be a private matter when you involved Miss Finch. Alistair retorted. He then raised his voice for all to hear. "Let it be known that Lord Finchley is a man who preys on the misfortunes of others. A man who attempts to coerce women by threatening their families. A man whose own debts are so vast, he must resort to blackmail to keep his head above water. He is a coward and a scoundrel, and he is not fit to be in the same room as decent men." The denouncement was absolute. It was a social execution, delivered with the precision of a sword stroke. Finchley stood pale and trembling as every eye in the room turned on him with contempt. His game was over. He turned and practically fled the ballroom. The drama had reached its peak. The whispers were deafening. Annalise stood amidst the wreckage of her plan, her public betrayal, and his stunning defense, not knowing what would happen next. Alistair turned back to her. The fury in his eyes had been replaced by something else, something she couldn't read. "We are leaving," he said, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't name. He took her arm, his grip firm but not harsh. He ignored the stares, the whispers, the presence of the Duke himself, and led her from the room, leaving the scandal of the season to fester in their wake. The carriage ride back to Grosvenor Square was a silent, agonizing eternity. Annalise stared out the window, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks, too ashamed to look at him. She had publicly humiliated him, called him unfeeling, and he had in turn defended her with a ferocity that defied all logic of their arrangement. She didn't understand. When they arrived at Rowanfield House, he didn't instruct the driver to take her home. Instead, he led her inside past a startled Jennings and into the grand library where they had held their first lessons. He poured 2 glasses of brandy, handed one to her, and stood before the cold fireplace. "You should have told me," he said, his back to her. His voice was not angry, but filled with a deep, weary sorrow. "How could I?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Our engagement is a contract. My family being on the verge of ruin, that's a breach of terms. I was damaged goods. I was bringing scandal to your name, the very thing you sought to avoid. I thought you would cast me aside. It was my problem to solve. You thought I would abandon you to a man like Finchley to protect my own name." He turned around, and the pain in his eyes was so profound it made her flinch. "After all this time, Annalise, is that truly what you think of me? It is what you taught me to think." She cried, the tears now flowing freely, that everything is a transaction, that emotion is a liability, that control is survival. I was merely following your rules. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and stood before her, his presence overwhelming. He gently took the brandy glass from her trembling hand and set it aside. "Then I was a fool," he said, his voice raw. "A damned fool." He reached up and cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I have been a hypocrite. I told you to view this as a contract because I was too much of a coward to admit the truth. To myself or to you?" Annalise stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "The truth. This was never just a bargain for me." "Not really." His thumb stroked her cheek, wiping away a tear. "I did not agree to your mad scheme that night simply because I was bored. I agreed because I had been watching you for weeks." Her breath hitched. "When I first saw you at a musicale at Lady Wyndham's," he confessed, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "You were arguing with some pompous academic about Keats's poetry. You were brilliant and passionate, and you didn't seem to notice or care that I was there. In a room full of people posturing and performing, you were the only real thing. I went to the Devonshire ball that night for you. I stood in the shadows, trying to work up the courage to have my friend Davies arrange an introduction. I was trying to find a way into your world." He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. "And then you, in your beautiful, reckless desperation, simply walked up and grabbed my hand. You did in one moment what I had been too afraid to do for a month. You seized fate. And I seized my opportunity. The revelation was staggering. The entire foundation of their relationship, the cold, calculated bargain, was a lie. It had all been a pretext for him to be near her. His protection, his lessons, his moments of vulnerability, it all clicked into place. As for your father's debts," he continued softly, "I have been aware of them for over a month. Captain Davies's inquiries tonight were not his first. I bought the debt myself last week through my solicitor. Your family is in no danger. They are secure. I was simply waiting for the right moment to tell you a moment when you might believe the gesture was not part of our arrangement, but from the heart." Annalise could only stare at him speechless. The man who claimed emotion was a liability had orchestrated everything to save her, to protect her, to be with her, all while hiding behind the very mask he claimed to despise. "Alistair." She breathed his name, a prayer on her lips. "I was so lost after the war, after losing Thomas," he said, his grey eyes shining with unshed tears. "I built walls of ice around my heart and called it control. I thought it was strength. But you, Annalise, you melted them without even trying. You made me want to feel again. And tonight, when I thought I was losing you, I realized that a life without you, no matter how peaceful or controlled, would be an empty one." He leaned in his forehead, resting against hers. The engagement was a sham. The courtship was a lie. But my feelings are not. I love you, Annalise Finch. I think I have from the moment I heard you defend poetry in a room full of fools. I am asking you now not as part of a bargain, but as a man who is utterly and completely in love with you. Will you be my wife, my true wife, in every sense of the word? Through her tears, Annalise began to laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. All the fear, all the pretense, fell away, leaving only the beautiful shining truth. She reached up, wrapped her arms around his neck, and pulled him down to her. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Oh yes, Alistair. Always yes." Their first kiss was not the chaste public peck of their charade. It was a kiss of desperate relief and profound love, a sealing of a bargain, made not in a ballroom, but in their hearts. She had grabbed his hand to save herself from a fleeting scandal, never knowing she was truly grabbing onto a love that would define her entire life, a hand that, as he had promised himself that first night, would never ever let go. And so, a desperate act in a crowded ballroom became the first chapter of a legendary love story. Annalise and Alistair, the Shadow Earl and the merchant's daughter, proved to the world that the most profound truths can be hidden behind the most convincing facades. Theirs was a journey that began with a lie to save a reputation, but ended with a truth that saved two souls. They learned that true strength isn't about control or building walls, but about having the courage to be vulnerable, to reach out from the shadows, and to hold on no matter the cost. Their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the most magnificent rewards, and that love can be found in the most unexpected of moments, a frantic heartbeat, a whispered plea, and a hand that once taken was never meant to be released. If their story swept you away, and you believe in a love that shatters all expectations, please let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with a fellow romantic, and subscribe to our channel for more tales of history, drama, and love against all odds.